Thank you. That was a fantastic introduction. Appreciate it. Thank you also to all of you for sticking around. I know it's been a long day, probably with a lot of inputs. Yeah, I'm excited to share with you a little bit a different angle on looking at how you can optimize your web shop. Before we go into that, can I get a show of hands? Who actually is a merchant in here? Who operates an online business? Anyone selling online? Awesome. Okay, cool. Quite a few of you. Everyone else also, I hope this presentation can give you a bit of an inspiration on how you can kind of coach your customers in especially paying attention to the after checkout experience. All right, so yeah, you heard my background, just a few words also on Parcel Perform. So we basically started Parcel Perform about 4 years ago. I'm a little bit of a nerd. I come from the logistics industry, and I got really passionate about the power of data that you can aggregate in logistics, especially parcel tracking data. So my team and I at Parcel Perform, we basically set out to make sense of the data and actually kind of increase its value by standardizing it and aggregating data across 600 different carriers. We've been luckily very successful. We have 3 offices. One is here in Singapore, of course. We also have an office in Vietnam and Germany, and we are supporting over 3,000 clients globally. But that's just a little bit on Parcel Perform. I think talking less about the business as such, but rather kind of want to give you a bit of an inspiration. So let me just work out the clicker. Awesome. Okay. So what I really want to talk about today is what happens to your customers after they check out. So all of you guys have heard a lot of presentations today on how you can optimize your web shop and how you can make it prettier, more intuitive, a better UI. But there's one step that many people are actually overlooking, and that's exactly what happens after the successful purchase. The order is confirmed, the payment worked out. What happens to your customer there? And that's what we call after checkout experience. So let's look at this. Actually, let's start with a few bad news, but I think that shows you also the importance of this area. If we look at customers, then actually 60% of them rate their after checkout experience as underwhelming. Even more so, 56% of them are actually disappointed with the service that they get from retailers, and 83% of our customers think brands really do not care about their after checkout experience. Most important number here is actually the last one. 39% of our customers say that a negative experience on the delivery is actually going to stop them from buying at the retailer again. So think about this. Actually, you do everything you can. You spend a lot of marketing dollars in improving the webshop experience while the customer is shopping. But then there's a part where you're kind of losing control a little bit. And that's when you kind of hand over the order to a delivery company and kind of let them manage the final mile of delivery and also the experience that the customer has. So that's what we set out to change a little bit. Let's look at it in a bit more detail. Why should you care about it? Well, the first statement here, if we look at the next slide, it's huge. It's a huge opportunity, and let me show you why. If we look at kind of how customers are dealing with the after-purchase experience, then actually, on average, 4.6 times a customer looks for the update on his parcel. That's 4.6 times a valuable touch point that you can have with the end consumer. That's 4.6 times more than your newsletter is probably read, because the customers are really proactively looking for an update on when their order is about to arrive. So if we look at a few more statistics, can we go one slide back? Sorry. 40% of the shoppers actually check an item at least once a day. So once a day, you have an opportunity to get in touch with one of your customers. 90% of them typically track it online. So they want to come back to your web shop, but instead you send them usually to a carrier to find out what their latest parcel status is. And 93% of these shoppers actually expect you to not make them look for an update, but to actually get proactively informed. So that's a very important touch point for you that you can leverage for your brand building as well. If we look at the next slide, there's also a cost component to this. So if we look back on how parcel tracking is done at the moment, if your customer is lucky, you give him a link to a carrier website, and the customer looks at the carrier website to really get an update. but often these carrier websites are difficult to understand and often even in a different language, especially if you shop cross-border. What happens to a customer in these cases, can we go back, is they call you. And calling customer service is a huge cost factor. And actually 30% of these inquiries are not talking about the product that they want to shop or any questions on the website. They actually ask you about the parcel status. So there's a lot of back and forth and inquiries about the actual tracking of a parcel that you can save if you manage this process very, very well. And that's what we set out to do with Parcel Perform. If we look at the next slide, thank you. By kind of managing this customer experience on the last mile, there's a huge impact you can leverage on your overall customer lifetime value. In our experience, and going back to my earlier slide about this being huge, there's 40% increase in customer lifetime value that you can leverage by managing this process. Why is that so? First of all, you can create a lot more contact points with the customers by, instead of sending the carrier updates to your customer, managing these updates on your side. Secondly, if you have control about the data and you really know where all your parcels are, you're also going to have cost savings on the customer service side because it's much easier to find out for them. And lastly, with the standardization of data that you get on the last mile, you can also pick the better carrier to work with. And if you look at your spend on logistics, it's actually a huge cost factor on your e-commerce operations. Let's go into a little bit more detail here. We earlier said it's a big opportunity. But next to being big, and I showed you the improvements that you can have, it's also urgent. Because what we kind of experience at Parcel Perform is if you want to drive customer loyalty, you should do it now. You spend all this marketing dollars on improving your web shop, but the opportunity there is now and for you to grasp. So let's look at the next few slides. Can you help me, guys? Ah, fantastic. Okay. So customers are well aware that basically their experience on the last mile is going to kind of impact their loyalty to your web shop, right? So 58% of our customers actually choose a different e-commerce website because they simply get better e-commerce delivery opportunities. So I think you all kind of made this experience where you want to buy something online, but if they tell you it's going to arrive in like 5 to 10 days, you might end up choosing a different web shop, or you might end up just going to the store itself. 54% of these customers also say that it's very important for them to get kind of tracking for their parcels to have the visibility where their orders actually are. So the third point here is next to being important and an urgency now, it can actually be done. And that's what we're doing here at Parcel Perform. So what we set out to do is we kind of want to aggregate and standardize all this parcel tracking data across more than 600 different carriers worldwide. So regardless of where you're shipping, regardless in which country you're operating in, whether it's domestic or internationally, we actually help you to standardize all this data and then allow you to work with it. Just a little bit more on the standardization. Why is this important? I think many of you will know that once you work with multiple delivery companies, one example, for example, here in Singapore, you shop on Lazada, the stuff usually comes from China. The first mile updates come from China Post, right? So all the updates are actually in Chinese. It's very difficult to understand. The other challenge here is that the updates are usually also coming from a different time zone. You're shipping internationally, cross-border, China or any other country operates in a different time zone. So all these events gets messed up and you really don't know what's happening to your parcel. And that's actually what we're standardizing with Parcel Perform. So why is this important? And what can we do once we have the standardized data? We actually look at 3 areas. One is to update your customers on where the parcels are. Secondly, number 2 is to improve your customer service and the efficiency and also save costs. And the third aspect is to really select the right delivery partner. This is probably something that some of you will be very familiar with. And I'm always actually shocked when someone sends me to these pages. But this is actual live screenshots of how carriers update your customers on the delivery of your parcels. So regardless of what you do, regardless of how beautiful the UI on your web shop is, you end up sending your customers to something like this, which would be extremely difficult to understand. And that's why we kind of want to encourage you to instead provide them with your own tracking page. instead of sending them away from your web shop, and it would be very difficult to regain them back with newsletters, don't send them to the carriers, but build your own tracking page. And our service with Parcel Perform can actually allow you to do that. So you can have your own branded interface, you can have your own logo. The customer really develops trust because they feel that you actually keep them engaged and you take care of that last part of the delivery as well. Secondly, use the opportunity to kind of improve your customer service. So if we look at the average number of customer service tickets, it's more than 980 different tickets. And we saw earlier that about 40% of them are actually related to customer parcel tracking inquiries. So what we did with Parcel Perform is to give you a very nice kind of neat interface that actually aggregates the parcel tracking data across all your different carriers and also gives you a very easy to grasp overview on the status of your delivery. So what happens at the moment, some of you who operate an e-commerce shop will know this, right? Your customer service agent usually have like 10 different tabs open with the tracking pages of all the different carriers that the parcel could come from. Then a customer calls and tracking IDs are usually 10 to 12 digits long. So your customer is trying to give you a 10 to 12 digit number. The customer service agent is trying to put it into multiple tabs on your browser. That creates a lot of effort and ultimately also tells the customer exactly what he could have seen on the website of the carrier himself. So instead of doing that, we encourage you to kind of use platforms like ours to get a very easy to grasp overview. Simply type in the customer name, the order number, or the tracking ID and get all the updates within a few seconds and improve the efficiency of the call and also kind of give the customer that is calling a much smoother experience. The last aspect here is to not only have a better customer experience after the purchase, but to also optimize your logistics setup. So like I said earlier, logistics is a huge part of your spending category. If you ship e-commerce, you have a lot of parcels going around the world. But the transparency that you get on the actual delivery performance of your carrier is very low. I myself, I worked at DHL for 6 years. I know that we only had a handful of customers that actually got a kind of logistics KPI reporting, kind of highlighting the actual transit times. Now you might get one from one of your carriers. You might have 5 different carriers, but they all report different KPIs. So there is a high level of intransparency on the actual performance of your carriers. And that has an impact on your customers as well. So again, if we look at the numbers, delivery experience has, 79% of them say that they would kind of not purchase again if the delivery was damaged. 69% of them says that the delivery was late, and 57% of them said that the carrier is unprofessional. But your only way to find out is actually when the customer calls and complains to you. So we really believe that we should kind of bring the power back to the merchants for them to proactively know what's going on in their logistics and supply chain. And that's what we have done due to the standardization of the data. So we can aggregate data across 600 different carriers. And because we standardize it, for the first time, you're actually able to measure the real-time performance of your carriers. Whether it's kind of the transit times, whether it's the deliverability, an issue reporting, or also an SLA management. So what our platform actually allows you to do is to say, hey, the carrier has promised me to deliver something in 3 days, and you get then proactive alerts if that is not the case. Why is this important? Because many merchants at the moment kind of choose a carrier based on the cost, and then they choose usually at least 2 and kind of half the volumes to the carriers, or maybe 60 to 40%. Because there's no way to really get a grasp on how well they are performing and quickly shift volumes if something is going wrong. And that's exactly what our platform allows you to do. Because you get real-time information and updates on how well the carriers are performing, you're actually able to quickly shift to the service provider that gives you really the best service. Okay. So my question to you is, are you still managing kind of your deliveries in Excel sheets? And I think if some of you, especially the e-commerce merchants around here, if you're very honest, your ops guys probably have an Excel sheet on their local hard drive that has all the tracking IDs and a few updates in there. So we believe, with all the opportunities out there, with you putting so much focus on optimizing your marketing on the website, on getting exact click statistics, it's also time to kind of digitalize this experience around logistics. So I can just encourage you kind of replace all the Excel sheets and come on board with a provider like us that allows you to get the full transparency and have all the services in a cloud. And again, just to recap on this, why do I think it's important? It's important because I think your customers deserve to be kind of well taken care of even after their purchase, and give them proactive email notifications on their actual delivery, which is a fantastic opportunity for you to expose your branding. Secondly, I think it's time to help your customer service agents. So instead of opening 10 tabs, they actually have one nice interface that allows them to respond to the customer a lot faster and make this process a lot more efficient. And thirdly, with logistics being a huge spending category in your business, I think it's a fantastic opportunity to finally get the transparency that you need to choose the best provider that you can work with. All right, that's it from my side. I'm around here for another little while, so let's get in touch. Hit me up on LinkedIn or feel free to drop me an email, and I'd be more than happy to kind of talk to you and see how we can jointly support you and give your customers a better experience. Thank you so much. Any questions? Any questions? Okay, cool. Cool.
What are the best performing carriers in Singapore that you've seen to ship?
Good question. So what are the best performing carriers in Singapore? It's actually hard to say because it depends on multiple things, right? If you're just shipping domestically, it depends on the shipment size that you have, and it depends on the service that you want. And that's actually a very important one, right? Because in our experience, you might think that the customer just wants to have the parcel very fast, right? So one could argue that the best carriers are the ones that can deliver it tomorrow. But if you look into the data, then you realize that the customer tomorrow might not even be at home, right? So the best carrier for your kind of deliveries might be a guy that delivers us to a parcel locker. So it's a lot more convenient for the people to collect it. Or it might be the guy that actually gives a time window in the evening for your customers to actually be at home. So it's very difficult to say who is the best one, but it's easy to find out because if you kind of have your tracking email notifications, there's an opportunity to ask the customer for feedback, and you can then steer who is the best provider for you. Thank you, though. Okay. Thank you very much, guys.